Handcuffs bit brutally into Samuel Caldwell's wrists, cold steel, locking him into a trap he had meticulously built himself. Up front, 2 corrupt police officers howled with laughter, bragging about dragging another defenseless black man off the pavement. They celebrated their easy catch, completely oblivious that the bruised, silent mechanic sitting in their rearview mirror was a top-tier FBI special agent wearing a live federal wire. Over the next 6 brutal hours, their arrogant mistake would detonate a devastating avalanche of karma. 17 untouchable badges would evaporate, a corrupt precinct would collapse, and a stunned city would hemorrhage $10 million. Samuel Caldwell adjusted the rearview mirror of his faded 2012 Honda Accord, his dark eyes scanning the desolate stretch of Lincoln Avenue. At 38, Samuel had spent over a decade deep undercover for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, dismantling cartels in Miami and rooting out organized crime in Chicago. But the assignment in the mid-sized Rust Belt city of Oak Ridge was different. It wasn't about drug lords or mob bosses. It was about the people meant to stop them. The Oak Ridge Police Department, specifically the 4th Precinct, had been radiating red flags for 3 years. Federal informants had gone missing. Thousands of dollars in seized cash routinely evaporated from evidence lockers. But what finally caught the attention of the Department of Justice was the staggering number of excessive force complaints filed by the city's black residents. Complaints that Mayor William Hughes and Police Chief David O'Connor consistently swept under the rug. The local government was protecting its own, creating a culture of absolute impunity. Samuel's mission was simple: gather undeniable, actionable intelligence on the ground level. He was dressed for the part in faded denim, a worn-out grey hoodie, and scuffed work boots, playing the role of an out-of-work mechanic named Arthur Pendleton. As Samuel signaled to turn onto 4th Street, a familiar flash of blue and red illuminated his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer. He was going 28 in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. His tags were up to date. His turn signal had been activated a full 100 feet before the intersection. He pulled over smoothly, shifting the Honda into park, turning off the engine, and resting his hands visibly on the top of the steering wheel. He knew the drill. More importantly, he knew exactly who was patrolling this sector. In his side mirror, he watched 2 figures step out of a heavily tinted cruiser. Officer Greg Miller, a broad-shouldered rookie with a notoriously aggressive reputation and a chip on his shoulder the size of a cinder block, approached the driver's side. Flanking the passenger side was Sergeant Thomas Briggs, a 20-year veteran whose name had appeared in 5 separate civil rights lawsuits, all of which had been settled out of court by the city. Miller swaggered up to the window, shining his heavy tactical flashlight directly into Samuel's eyes, despite it being 3 o'clock in the afternoon. "License and registration," Miller barked, his voice dripping with unearned authority. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state the reason for the stop. "Good afternoon, officer," Samuel replied, his voice a picture of measured calm. He kept his hands strictly on the wheel. "My wallet is in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed?" Miller scoffed, leaning closer to the window. "I said give me your damn license, buddy. Don't play games with me." "I'm trying to comply, officer," Samuel said steadily, refusing to break eye contact, though the glare of the flashlight made him squint. "I just want to ensure you know where my hands are going. I'll reach for my wallet now." Samuel moved slowly, pulling out the worn leather wallet he used for his Arthur alias. It contained a perfectly forged state ID, a few crumpled dollar bills, and nothing else. His actual FBI credentials, complete with his federal badge, were secured in a hidden, biometric lockbox, bolted beneath the driver's seat. He handed the card through the window. Miller snatched it, holding it up to the light. Arthur Pendleton. You were a long way from home, Arthur. What are you doing in this neighborhood? Just driving through, officer, Samuel replied neutrally. May I ask why I was pulled over? Sergeant Briggs tapped his nightstick against the passenger side window, a loud, sharp crack that would have made a civilian jump. Samuel merely shifted his gaze. You swerved back there, Arthur, Briggs called out, his voice a raspy drawl. Looked like you couldn't keep it in the lines. Have you been drinking? I haven't had a drop of alcohol, Sergeant, Samuel stated, and I maintained my lane the entire time. Are you calling my partner a liar? Miller snapped, his hand dropping to rest aggressively on the butt of his service weapon. The escalation was textbook. It was exactly what the federal analysts had warned about. The officers were creating a hostile environment, trying to provoke a reaction that would justify further action. I'm merely stating the facts of my driving, Samuel said, his tone remaining deliberately flat. His pulse was steady. Beneath the worn hoodie, a wire was transmitting every word, every breath, directly to a secure server at the regional FBI field office, where Special Agent in Charge Robert Kingsley was listening live. Step out of the car, Miller ordered, taking a step back and unlatching the holster of his firearm. Officer, I haven't committed a crime. Am I under arrest? Samuel asked. I gave you a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle right now, Miller yelled, his face flushing red. Samuel knew his rights. He also knew that asserting them on the side of the road with two corrupt cops was a losing game for a civilian. But Samuel wasn't a civilian. He was a federal agent actively building a criminal conspiracy case. He needed them to show their entire hand. I will step out, Samuel said calmly, raising his hands to shoulder height as he used his left hand to unbuckle the seatbelt. I am complying with your order. He opened the door slowly and stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. Before he could even straighten his posture, Miller grabbed him by the scruff of his hoodie and violently shoved him against the side of the Honda. The hot metal burned against Samuel's cheek, but he offered absolutely no physical resistance. Spread 'em! Miller shouted, kicking Samuel's boots apart with unnecessary force. Officer, you do not have my consent to search my person or my vehicle, Samuel stated loudly and clearly, ensuring the recording device picked up every syllable. Shut your mouth, Briggs growled, coming around the back of the car. He grabbed Samuel's left arm, twisting it behind his back at an agonizing angle. Stop resisting. I am not resisting, Samuel replied, his voice strained but remarkably composed. My hands are behind my back. I am complying. Miller began aggressively patting Samuel down, his hands roaming roughly over his pockets. Finding nothing but a set of house keys and a pack of gum, Miller grunted in frustration. What are you hiding, Arthur? Where's the dope? I don't have anything illegal on me, Samuel said. Briggs shoved Samuel's face harder into the roof of the car. We'll see about that. Miller, search the car. Wait, Samuel interjected. You need probable cause or a warrant to search my vehicle. I am explicitly denying consent to a vehicle search. Briggs leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. Here's the thing, Arthur. I smell marijuana coming from the cab. That gives me all the probable cause I need. Isn't that right, Miller? Smells like a skunk in there to me, Sarge, Miller laughed, opening the driver's side door and beginning to tear through the interior. He ripped the contents of the glove box onto the floorboards, threw the floor mats onto the street, and yanked at the upholstery. Samuel closed his eyes, cataloguing every violation. Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful search and seizure, excessive force, falsifying probable cause. It was a gold mine. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division was going to have a field day with these two. Finding nothing in the main cabin, Miller looked under the driver's seat and spotted the steel lockbox. His eyes lit up. "Got something here, Sarge. Looks like a safe." Miller yanked on it, but it was bolted directly to the chassis. "Give me the keys for this box, Arthur," Miller demanded, walking back over and shoving the flashlight into Samuel's ribs. "I don't have keys for it. It's biometric," Samuel answered truthfully. "And again, you do not have a warrant to search my vehicle." "You think you're a smart guy, huh?" Briggs sneered. He grabbed a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt and ratcheted them onto Samuel's wrists, clicking them tight enough to instantly cut off the circulation. Samuel winced slightly but kept his mouth shut. "You're under arrest, Arthur." "For what charge?" Samuel asked. "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, interfering with a police investigation," Briggs rattled off, practically laughing as he read Samuel a completely fabricated list of charges. "Take your pick." Miller grabbed Samuel by the arm and dragged him toward the cruiser. Samuel didn't drag his feet. He walked under his own power. But Miller still felt the need to shove his head downward, roughly as he forced him into the hard plastic back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut, leaving Samuel in the sweltering heat of the cruiser. He adjusted his wrists, wincing as the metal bit into his skin. He could have ended it right there. He could have shouted the safe word, bringing 3 black Subarus full of heavily armed tactical FBI agents swarming onto the street in less than 90 seconds. He could have told them to look inside the lockbox for his federal shield. But Samuel was a master of the long game. Arresting 2 street cops wouldn't change the culture of Oak Ridge. It wouldn't tear out the rot at the roots. If he revealed himself now, Briggs and Miller would claim it was a misunderstanding. Chief O'Connor would issue a meaningless apology, put them on paid administrative leave, and the machine would keep churning. No, Samuel needed them to document their lies. He needed them to take him to the precinct, to involve their commanding officers, to create a paper trail of corruption, so thick it could choke a horse. He needed the rot to expose itself under the fluorescent lights of the 4th precinct. Briggs and Miller climbed into the front seats, completely unaware that the silent man in the back was currently holding their entire futures in the palm of his handcuffed hands. "Stupid punk," Miller muttered, turning on the ignition. "Thought he knew his rights. I hate the ones who think they know the law." "They all learn eventually, kid," Briggs chuckled, pulling the cruiser away from the curb, leaving Samuel's Honda discarded on the side of the road. "Let's take him downtown. Let him rot in holding for a few hours. See how much he likes his rights then." Samuel looked out the window as the run-down buildings of the east side blurred past. Yes, he thought, a cold, calculated patience settling over him. Let's go downtown. The 4th precinct was a crumbling brick fortress built in the late 70s, radiating an aura of institutional decay. The air inside smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and cheap floor wax. As Miller and Briggs hauled Samuel through the heavy double doors into the booking area, the chaotic hum of the precinct washed over them. Telephones rang incessantly, officers shouted over one another, and the harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Desk Sergeant Frank Peterson, a heavily overweight man with a receding hairline and permanent grease stains on his uniform, barely looked up from his computer monitor as they approached the high counter. "What do we have here, Tommy?" Peterson grunted, gesturing lazily toward Samuel with a half-eaten pen. "Got a live one, Frank," Briggs said, leaning against the counter. "Arthur Pendleton. Traffic stop turned into a whole production. Resisting, failure to comply, the usual garbage." "He was acting suspicious too," Miller chimed in, eager to impress his senior officers. "Had a bolted-in safe under his seat, refused to open it. Probably moving weight for the East Side crew." Peterson finally looked at Samuel, his eyes raking over the undercover agent's scuffed clothes and bruised cheek. "Looks like he tripped and fell on the sidewalk too," Peterson noted, a nasty smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, clumsy guy," Miller laughed. "I was assaulted by these officers during an unlawful traffic stop," Samuel stated, his voice carrying through the booking area. The room went quiet for a fraction of a second before a few officers chuckled. "I am requesting medical attention for my wrists, and I want my phone call." From down the hallway, a heavy set of footsteps approached. Captain Richard Sterling, the precinct commander, stepped into the booking area. Sterling was a polished, ambitious man who wore tailored uniforms and spent more time rubbing elbows with Mayor Hughes than doing actual police work. He was the architect of the 4th Precinct's zero-tolerance policy, a mandate that essentially gave his officers free rein to terrorize the poorer neighborhoods to inflate their arrest statistics. "What's the hold-up, Sergeant?" Sterling asked, holding a mug of coffee. "Just a loudmouth, Captain," Peterson said. "Wants to file a complaint." Sterling looked Samuel up and down, his expression one of utter disdain. "Is that right? You want to file a complaint, son?" "I want my legally mandated phone call, and I want to speak to an attorney," Samuel said, holding Sterling's gaze. "Your officers fabricated probable cause, unlawfully searched my vehicle and used excessive force." Sterling sighed dramatically, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He stepped closer to Samuel, dropping his voice so only the officers nearby could hear. "Listen to me very carefully, Arthur. You are in my house now. Out there, on the street, you might think you have some sort of voice. In here, you are nothing. You are a piece of paper on my desk. If you want to make things difficult, we can make your stay here exceptionally painful. We can lose your paperwork. We can stick you in a cell with people who don't take kindly to strangers. Or you can sit down, shut up, and take your charges like a man." Samuel didn't blink. "I understand perfectly, Captain. You are explicitly denying me my right to counsel and threatening me with physical harm to coerce compliance." Sterling's face hardened. He looked at Briggs. "Throw him in holding cell 4. Don't process him yet. Let him sit in the dark for a few hours. Maybe he'll find some respect." "With pleasure, Captain," Briggs said, grabbing Samuel roughly by the bicep. They dragged him down a narrow, dimly lit corridor, lined with iron-barred cells. The smell of urine and despair was overpowering. Briggs shoved Samuel into cell 4, a concrete box containing nothing but a steel bench and a lidless toilet. The heavy iron door slammed shut, the electronic lock engaging with a loud, final clack. "Enjoy your stay, Arthur," Miller taunted through the bars. "We're going to go write up your report. Make sure we get all the details right." Samuel stood in the center of the cell, listening to their boots echo down the hallway. Once he was sure he was alone, he walked over to the steel bench and sat down. Despite the throbbing in his wrists and the ache in his jaw, a tight smile formed on his lips. Everything was going exactly according to plan. 3 miles away, inside a nondescript office building overlooking the city center, the atmosphere was wildly different. The FBI's regional command center was a hive of intense, focused activity. Banks of monitors displayed live feeds, GPS tracking data, and audio waveforms. Special Agent in Charge Robert Kingsley stood with his arms crossed, staring at a massive screen that showed a blinking red dot positioned directly over the 4th Precinct. Kingsley was a man carved from granite, a veteran of federal law enforcement who had zero tolerance for dirty cops. "Audio is clear, sir," a young technician wearing heavy headphones reported. "We have it all. The false stop, the denial of consent, the physical assault, the fabricated charges, and Captain Sterling's direct threats. The wire is broadcasting perfectly." "What about the vehicle?" Kingsley asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Local PD impound just towed it," another agent responded. They haven't breached the lockbox, they don't have the tools without completely destroying the chassis, and they won't do that without a warrant. Kingsley nodded slowly. They took the bait. They swallowed the hook right down to the stomach. He turned to his deputy. Get the Department of Justice on the line. I want the federal prosecutor briefed immediately. Tell them we have an open and shut case of systemic civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, and assault under the color of law. When do we pull him out, sir? The deputy asked. Not yet, Kingsley said, his eyes glued to the blinking red dot. Sam knows what he's doing. He's giving them time to falsify the official police reports. Once they submit those documents into the system, they commit federal perjury and wire fraud. We wait until they dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. Back at the precinct, inside the second-floor break room, Briggs and Miller were doing exactly that. They sat at a sticky plastic table, hunched over a laptop, laughing as they typed out the official incident report. Okay, so I wrote that he lunged at you when you asked him to step out, Miller said, typing with 2 fingers. That justifies the physical takedown. Make sure you add that his eyes were bloodshot and he was sweating profusely, Briggs instructed, taking a bite of a stale donut. We need to cover the vehicle search. Say we suspected he was under the influence of narcotics and acting erratically. Got it, Miller grinned. What about the safe? Just write that it's suspicious contraband. We'll get a judge to sign a warrant tomorrow, pop it open, and see what this idiot is hiding. Probably gang money. Several other officers were in the break room, casually listening to the fabrication. Officer Davies, a 5-year veteran, walked by and patted Miller on the back. Giving the new guy the business, huh? Make sure you tack on a resisting charge for me, too. I need the stats for my monthly review. You got it, Davies, Miller laughed. None of them knew. None of them suspected that every keystroke they made, every lie they typed, was sealing their doom. They operated with the arrogant comfort of men who had never faced consequences in their lives. They believed the badge was a shield. Down in the holding cell, Samuel watched the digital clock mounted on the far wall. It read 4:15 p.m. He had been in the cell for a little over an hour. His wrists were bruised purple, but his mind was sharp. He began to mentally calculate the charges. Briggs and Miller were looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Sterling, as the commanding officer facilitating the corruption, could face 15. The other officers complicit in the cover-up would lose their badges, their pensions, and likely face state charges. Suddenly, the heavy door at the end of the cell block clanked open. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. It wasn't Briggs or Miller. It was Lieutenant Evans, the second-in-command of the precinct, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Evans looked flustered, holding a piece of paper in his hand. He stopped in front of Samuel's cell, peering through the bars. Arthur Pendleton? Samuel stood up slowly. Yes. Evans looked at the paper, then back at Samuel. We're going to fingerprint you now. Stand back from the door. Samuel knew this was the turning point. Up until now, his Arthur Pendleton A.D. had held up because it was a masterful forgery. But AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, couldn't be fooled. The moment his prints hit the scanner, the local system would bounce them to the FBI database. His true identity would flash on the screen with a Level 1 federal security clearance attached to it. I'm ready when you are, Lieutenant, Samuel said, stepping forward as the cell door slid open. They escorted him out of the holding area and back toward the booking desk. Desk Sergeant Peterson was still there, wiping sweat from his forehead. The atmosphere in the room had shifted slightly. The chaotic energy had dulled into a lazy, late-afternoon lull. Put his hands on the glass, Evans ordered, gesturing to the digital fingerprint scanner next to Peterson's computer. Briggs, who had just come downstairs from the break room with Miller, leaned against the wall, a smug smile on his face. "Let's see if our boy Arthur has any outstanding warrants. I bet he's a frequent flyer." Samuel placed his right index finger on the glowing green glass. The machine beeped. He placed his middle finger. Beep. He rolled his thumb. Beep. He moved his hands away and stood silently, watching the computer monitor out of the corner of his eye. Peterson clicked the mouse, submitting the prints to the national database. The little hourglass icon spun on the screen. 10 seconds passed. 15 seconds. "System must be slow today," Peterson muttered, tapping the side of the monitor. Then the screen flashed red. A loud, sharp alarm tone emitted from the computer speakers, startling Peterson so badly he knocked his coffee mug over. A massive alert box filled the monitor, displaying a high-definition photograph of Samuel Caldwell in his formal FBI dress suit, staring back at them. The text beneath the photo was bold, glaring, and unmistakable. Restricted access. Level 1, Federal Agent, Special Agent, Samuel Caldwell, Federal Bureau of Investigation. If this agent is in custody, contact the Department of Justice immediately. Peterson's face drained of all color. He looked from the monitor to the bruised, handcuffed man standing in front of him, and back to the monitor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is it, Frank?" Briggs asked, pushing off the wall and walking over. "He got warrants." Briggs looked at the screen. His smug smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood rushed out of his face so fast he looked like a ghost. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into Miller. "What?" Miller asked, confused. He looked at the screen. "Wait. What the hell is this? Is this a hack?" Samuel turned around slowly to face the officers. The calm, submissive demeanor of Arthur Pendleton vanished instantly, replaced by the lethal, commanding presence of a federal agent who had just caught his prey. "No, Officer Miller," Samuel said, his voice echoing loudly in the suddenly dead-silent booking room. "It's not a hack, but I do believe you are the ones who are out of time." Silence, thick and suffocating, descended upon the booking area of the 4th Precinct. The buzzing of the overhead fluorescent lights suddenly sounded as loud as a chainsaw. Desk Sergeant Frank Peterson remained frozen, his trembling hand hovering inches above his computer mouse, terrified that clicking it might somehow detonate the room. Sergeant Thomas Briggs, a man who had built a 20-year career on intimidation and brutalizing citizens who couldn't fight back, looked completely hollowed out. His jaw worked soundlessly. Beside him, Officer Greg Miller was breathing in short, rapid gasps, his eyes darting frantically from the high-definition FBI portrait on the monitor to the handcuffed, bruised man standing calmly before them. "This is a joke," Miller stammered, his voice cracking an octave higher than usual. "This is some kind of sick prank. He's a nobody. He's a mechanic from the East Side." Samuel Caldwell did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood with his hands cuffed behind his back, his posture radiating a sudden, overwhelming authority that had been entirely absent 10 minutes prior. "Check the badge number, Sergeant Peterson," Samuel instructed, his tone conversational but laced with steel. "Go ahead, run the federal identification number through the NCIC terminal. Verify the clearance level." Peterson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He slowly typed the alphanumeric code flashing on the screen into the National Crime Information Center database. The terminal pinged almost instantly. The same photograph appeared, accompanied by a long list of federal clearances, active duty status, and a direct warning flag from the Department of Justice. It's real," Peterson whispered, his face the color of wet ash. He looked up at Briggs. "Tommy, he's a Fed. He's a Level 1 special agent." "Take the cuffs off him," A voice barked from the top of the stairwell. Captain Richard Sterling had rushed out of his office, his polished shoes clattering down the metal steps. Someone had hit the internal panic button under the desk, alerting his private terminal. He pushed past Miller and Briggs, his eyes fixed on Samuel. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the frantic calculation of a rat trapped in a sinking ship. "I said take the cuffs off him right now," Sterling yelled, grabbing Peterson by the shoulder. "Give me the keys!" Peterson fumbled with his belt, producing the small silver key. Sterling snatched it and lunged toward Samuel. "I wouldn't do that, Captain," Samuel said smoothly, taking a deliberate half-step backward. "Do not touch me." Sterling froze, the key hovering inches from Samuel's wrists. "Agent Caldwell, this is clearly a massive misunderstanding, a terrible lack of communication. My officers thought you were a suspect in a local narcotics sweep. If you had just identified yourself, I identified myself as Arthur Pendleton, a citizen of the United States," Samuel interrupted, his voice echoing in the dead quiet room. "A citizen who explicitly denied consent to a search, who offered no physical resistance, and who requested his legally mandated right to counsel. A citizen your officers assaulted, unlawfully detained, and threatened." "We can fix this," Sterling pleaded, his tailored uniform suddenly looking 2 sizes too big as he realized the magnitude of the disaster. "Let me uncuff you. Come up to my office. I'll get you a coffee. We can call your special agent in charge and clear this whole thing up. We are all on the same side here." "We are absolutely not on the same side, Captain Sterling," Samuel replied, holding the man's terrified gaze. "And you will not remove these handcuffs. They are preserving the crime scene, specifically the bruises on my wrists that corroborate the excessive force allegations currently being recorded by the federal wire I am wearing." Miller gasped, stumbling backward until his back hit the cinder-block wall. "A wire? He's wearing a wire?" Briggs looked like he was going to vomit. "The traffic stop. The car. You recorded everything?" "Everything," Samuel confirmed softly. "From the moment you activated your sirens, to the fabricated probable cause regarding the smell of marijuana, to the physical assault against the side of my vehicle. But more importantly, it has been recording every word spoken inside this precinct." Samuel tilted his head, looking directly at Miller. "Tell me, Officer Miller, did you finish typing up that incident report in the break room? The one where I supposedly lunged at you with bloodshot eyes?" Miller's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of the booking counter to keep from collapsing. They had just committed federal perjury, conspiracy, and falsification of official documents, and they had openly discussed doing it while a federal agent was sitting in their own holding cell. "Agent Caldwell, please," Sterling begged, the remnants of his pride entirely shattered. "Think about the collateral damage. If this gets out, it destroys the reputation of the entire department. Chief O'Connor is currently having his office raided by the FBI's Public Corruption Squad," Samuel stated, checking the digital clock on the wall. "Mayor Hughes is being served with a federal subpoena for his financial records regarding the civil rights settlement payouts. Your little empire is already burning to the ground, Captain. You just haven't smelled the smoke yet." Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the front of the precinct did not just open. They were violently thrown wide. The afternoon sunlight poured in, silhouetting a tactical nightmare for the corrupt officers of the 4th Precinct. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents wearing dark olive tactical gear, Kevlar vests emblazoned with FBI in bright yellow lettering, and carrying assault rifles swept into the room. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, fanning out and securing every exit, every hallway, and every tactical angle in less than 5 seconds. "FBI, nobody move! Hands away from your weapons! Hands on the counter!" The lead tactical agent roared, his voice booming like thunder. The local officers, completely outgunned and paralyzed by shock, immediately raised their hands. Peterson threw his arms into the air so fast he knocked his chair backward. Briggs slowly raised his trembling hands, staring at the laser sights painting his chest. Behind the tactical team walked Special Agent in Charge Robert Kingsley. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his face an impenetrable mask of absolute authority. He bypassed the terrified local cops and walked straight up to Samuel. "You took your time, Sam," Kingsley noted, a faint glimmer of grim satisfaction in his eyes. "Had to make sure they finished their paperwork, boss," Samuel replied. Kingsley turned to the tactical team. "Secure the building. Nobody makes a phone call. Nobody touches a computer. I want the servers locked down, and I want a team in the second-floor break room securing a silver laptop immediately. That is prime evidence." 2 agents sprinted up the stairs, bypassing a paralyzed Captain Sterling. Kingsley finally turned his attention to the men who had terrorized Oak Ridge for years. He stepped up to Sergeant Briggs, looking down at the corrupt cop with utter disgust. "Sergeant Thomas Briggs," Kingsley said, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, assault under the color of law, kidnapping, and federal wire fraud." "Kidnapping?" Briggs choked out, his eyes wide with a mix of defiance and absolute terror. "We were making a lawful arrest. You can't charge a cop with kidnapping for a traffic stop. When you forcibly detain a citizen without legal justification, fabricate probable cause, and transport them to a secondary location against their will, using the threat of deadly force, it meets the federal statute for kidnapping, Sergeant," Kingsley explained coldly. "And since you transported a federal agent, it carries a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Kingsley gestured to one of his agents. "Cuff him." Agent Sarah Jenkins, a no-nonsense veteran from the Chicago field office, stepped forward. She didn't use the gentle, cautious techniques they taught in the academy. She grabbed Briggs's arm, spun him around with enough force to make him grunt, and slammed his chest against the booking counter. She pulled his arms back sharply and slapped heavy federal steel around his wrists. "Hey, take it easy," Briggs yelped as the cuffs bit into his skin. "Stop resisting, Sergeant," Jenkins said, deadpan, throwing his own words right back at him. She patted him down aggressively, removing his service weapon, his taser, and his badge, tossing them onto the counter like garbage. Next was Miller. The rookie didn't even try to argue. As an agent approached him, Miller began to sob, the tears cutting tracks through the sweat on his face. "I was just following orders," Miller cried out, looking pleadingly at Sterling. "Captain, tell them. Briggs told me what to write. He told me to search the car. I didn't want to do it." "Shut your mouth, Miller," Briggs snapped from down the counter. "No, keep talking, Greg," Kingsley encouraged smoothly. The United States Attorney loves a cooperative witness. The first one to flip usually gets to see the sun again before they turn 60. "We can discuss your cooperation during your debrief." Miller was cuffed and dragged away, his legs practically giving out as he was marched toward the waiting fleet of black SUVs parked outside. Kingsley finally turned to Captain Sterling, who was standing frozen at the base of the stairs. Sterling's mind was racing, desperately trying to find a political lifeline, a loophole, anyone he could call to fix this. But the phone lines were already cut. The precinct was entirely under federal control. "Captain Richard Sterling," Kingsley said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest, signed by a United States District Judge, charging you with racketeer-influenced and corrupt Organizations Act violations, RICO. You've been operating this precinct as a continuing criminal enterprise." "RICO?" Sterling whispered, the blood draining completely from his face. You're charging a police captain under a mob statute? If it walks like a mob boss and extorts the public like a mob boss, we charge it like a mob boss, Kingsley replied smoothly. We have the wiretaps. We have the missing evidence logs. We have the financial records showing the kickbacks you've been receiving from the towing companies and the bail bondsmen. You are entirely dismantled, Captain. Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but Agent Jenkins was already there, spinning him around and cuffing him. The distinct click-clack of the metal ratchets echoed loudly. The untouchable commander of the 4th Precinct, a man who had ruined countless lives with a stroke of his pen, was now just another prisoner. Agent Caldwell, Kingsley said, turning back to Samuel. He pulled a small key from his pocket and stepped forward, gently unlocking the cuffs that Briggs had put on him hours earlier. Samuel rubbed his bruised, swollen wrists, letting out a long, slow breath as the blood rushed back into his hands. Thank you, sir. I was starting to lose feeling in my left thumb. You did excellent work today, Sam, Kingsley said, clapping him on the shoulder. The DOJ is going to have a field day with this audio. How's the jaw? It'll bruise, Samuel muttered, touching his cheek. But it was worth the price of admission. From the top of the stairs, an FBI technician leaned over the railing. SAC Kingsley, we've secured the silver laptop in the break room. The document was still open on the screen. Incident report, suspect Arthur Pendleton. They submitted it to the internal network 3 minutes before the breach. Perfect, Kingsley smiled tightly. Federal wire fraud and perjury are officially on the board. The dismantling of the 4th Precinct was methodical, absolute, and deeply humiliating for the corrupt officers. Every locker was cut open with bolt cutters. Every desk drawer was emptied into evidence boxes. Officers who had been out on patrol were recalled to the station, only to be stripped of their firearms and badges the moment they walked through the doors. Within 2 hours, 17 officers had been placed in federal custody. The entire command structure of the precinct was eradicated. Samuel stood near the front entrance, sipping a bottle of water, watching as Briggs, Miller, and Sterling were loaded into separate transport vans. The neighborhood residents, who usually avoided the precinct like the plague, had started to gather on the sidewalks. They watched in stunned, vindicated silence as the men who had terrorized them for years were paraded out in chains. An older black man standing near the police barricade caught Samuel's eye. He pointed at Briggs, who was keeping his head down in shame, and then looked at Samuel, giving a slow, solemn nod of approval. Samuel nodded back. The mission wasn't just about putting dirty cops in prison. It was about giving a city its breath back. But the fallout was far from over. The trap they had sprung in the 4th Precinct was just the first domino. The shockwave was about to hit City Hall, and Mayor William Hughes was directly in the blast radius. High above the sprawling concrete canopy of Oak Ridge, the atmosphere inside the mayoral suite was one of insulated arrogance. Mayor William Hughes sat behind a massive mahogany desk, swirling a crystal glass of expensive bourbon. Opposite him sat Police Chief David O'Connor, a man who wore his uniform like a king's vestments, heavy with unearned medals and polished brass. They were currently laughing over the city's upcoming budget allocations, specifically discussing how to funnel community center funding into a new fleet of armored tactical vehicles for the police department. They believed they were untouchable. They had built a local empire on fear, intimidation, and the systematic oppression of Oak Ridge's marginalized neighborhoods. The 4th Precinct was their crown jewel, a machine that generated arrests, seized assets, and kept the population too terrified to vote them out. Their laughter was violently interrupted when the heavy oak doors of the mayor's office burst open. Emily Stanton, the mayor's chief of staff, practically fell into the room, her face completely devoid of color, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She clutched a sleek tablet to her chest as if it were a shield. "Emily, what is the meaning of this?" Hughes barked, slamming his glass down, the bourbon splashing onto his pristine blotter. "We are in a private meeting." "Sir," Emily stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. It's the 4th precinct. It's gone." Chief O'Connor stood up, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What do you mean, gone? Did a pipe burst? Did they have a fire?" "No, Chief," Emily swallowed hard, stepping aside as the unmistakable sound of heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed down the marble hallway of City Hall. "The FBI, they just took the entire precinct. Captain Sterling, Sergeant Briggs, everybody. They're all in federal custody." O'Connor's hand instinctively dropped toward his radio, but before he could unclip it, the doorway was filled with figures in dark suits and yellow-lettered windbreakers. Special Agent in charge. Robert Kingsley stepped into the lavish office, flanked by 4 federal agents. He did not ask for permission to enter. He owned the room the second his foot crossed the threshold. "Mayor Hughes, Chief O'Connor," Kingsley announced, his voice a low, rumbling threat that seemed to vibrate the very glass in the windows. "I strongly suggest you put your hands where I can see them and step away from any telecommunications devices." "This is an outrage," Hughes shouted, his political instincts kicking in, though his voice betrayed a deep, primal panic. "You cannot simply barge into my office. I am the elected leader of this city. I demand you leave immediately, or I will have the governor on the phone within 30 seconds. "You won't be calling the governor, Mr. Mayor," Kingsley replied calmly, pulling a thick stack of folded documents from his inner pocket and tossing them onto the mahogany desk. They landed with a heavy, final thud right next to the spilled bourbon. "Those are federal subpoenas. We are seizing your financial records, your communication logs, and every piece of data on your private servers. Simultaneously, my agents are executing a search warrant on Chief O'Connor's office downstairs." O'Connor sank slowly back into his leather chair, the fight completely leaving his body. "Sterling," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "What did Richard do?" "Captain Sterling ran a criminal enterprise, Chief," Kingsley stated coldly. "He facilitated the extortion, assault, and unlawful detainment of hundreds of citizens, and he did it with your explicit protection. We have the paper trail proving you buried over 40 excessive force complaints against Sergeant Thomas Briggs alone. We have the financial audits showing seized assets being diverted into discretionary funds controlled by your office, Mayor." Hughes began to sweat profusely, his complexion turning a sickly shade of grey. "I knew nothing about any rogue actions taken by the 4th Precinct. If Captain Sterling was acting outside the bounds of the law, he will face the full weight of the city's justice system. I will fire him today." "You can't fire him, Mayor, because he works for the federal government now. As an inmate," Kingsley countered, a sharp edge of disgust in his tone. "And you can drop the plausible deniability. You didn't just ignore the corruption, you mandated it. You instituted the zero-tolerance policies that gave these officers quotas. You created the monster, and today that monster tried to eat an undercover federal agent." O'Connor's head snapped up. "An undercover agent? In the 4th? Special Agent Samuel Caldwell," Kingsley confirmed. "Your boys pulled him over without cause, fabricated evidence, physically assaulted him, denied him counsel, and threatened him with bodily harm. They documented their lies on official police reports. They did it all while wearing a federal wire. 17 officers were directly implicated in the cover-up in less than 6 hours. 17 badges gone." The silence in the room was absolute. The sheer scale of the disaster was paralyzing. 17 officers, a precinct commander, a federal agent, wiretaps, RICO charges. It was a career-ending, life-destroying catastrophe for everyone involved. "Do you know what happens next, Mayor?" Kingsley asked, leaning forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. "Every single arrest made by those 17 officers over the last 5 years is now compromised. The district attorney is going to have to vacate hundreds of convictions. The city is going to face an avalanche of civil rights lawsuits. Your administration is over. Your freedom is highly debatable." Hughes slumped in his chair, staring at the subpoenas as if they were venomous snakes. The fortress had not just been breached, it had been utterly vaporized. By sunset, the news had completely saturated the national media. News helicopters circled the abandoned 4th Precinct like vultures. Oak Ridge was no longer just a struggling Rust Belt city. It was the epicenter of the largest police corruption scandal of the decade. The real karma, however, was just beginning to take shape. It wasn't just about the criminal charges. It was about the crushing financial reality that was about to hit the corrupt infrastructure where it hurt the most. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Oak Ridge was a fortress of barricades and media vans. The crisp autumn air offered no relief to the tense, electric atmosphere surrounding the building. Inside, the culmination of Samuel Caldwell's agonizing afternoon in holding Cell 4 was coming to a devastating end for the men who put him there. Samuel sat in the front row of the gallery, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, a far cry from the scuffed boots and faded hoodie of Arthur Pendleton. His expression was completely neutral as he watched the proceedings. Standing before United States District Judge Harrison were former Captain Richard Sterling, former Sergeant Thomas Briggs, and former Officer Greg Miller. They wore identical orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to thick waist chains. The arrogance that had once defined them was entirely stripped away, replaced by the hollow, terrified stares of men who had finally met a wall they couldn't bully their way through. The DOJ had not offered generous plea deals. They wanted a public execution of the corruption, a warning siren broadcast to every dirty precinct in the country. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with zero tolerance for the abuse of power, looked down at the defendants with palpable disdain. "The evidence presented in this court is the most damning display of systemic abuse under the color of law I have seen in my entire career." Judge Harrison's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "You did not protect and serve. You operated as a federally recognized street gang, using badges as your colors and the law as your weapon. You targeted the vulnerable. You falsified documents to destroy lives, and you believed your authority made you invincible." She turned her gaze directly to Sterling. "Richard Sterling, for your role in directing this criminal enterprise under the RICO Act and for conspiring to deprive citizens of their civil rights, I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole." Sterling squeezed his eyes shut, his legs trembling so badly a U.S. Marshal had to step forward to steady him. "Thomas Briggs," the judge continued, "for assault under the color of law, kidnapping, and wire fraud, I sentence you to 15 years. Briggs hung his head, a single pathetic tear escaping his eye. The 20-year veteran, the untouchable street boss, was going to spend the rest of his functional life in a concrete box. Greg Miller, for your participation in the conspiracy and falsification of official records, I sentence you to 6 years. Miller openly sobbed, his youthful arrogance completely shattered. But the prison sentences were only half of the reckoning. The true, crippling karma was unleashed upon the city's financial and political structure. Following the convictions, the Department of Justice finalized a massive consent decree. Because the corruption was ruled as an intentional, systemic directive from the city's leadership, the city's municipal insurance provider legally invoked an intentional acts exclusion. They refused to cover a single dime of the liability. Oakridge was forced to pay out of its own general fund. The DOJ levied a massive penalty for the civil rights violations, and the city was forced to establish a victim compensation fund for the hundreds of individuals wrongly incarcerated by the 4th Precinct. The final bill presented to the city of Oakridge was a staggering $10 million. The financial blow was catastrophic to the corrupt political machine. To pay the $10 million, the city council was forced to liquidate assets. They sold off the armored vehicles O'Connor had purchased. They completely defunded the mayor's discretionary accounts. Worst of all for the corrupt establishment, the pensions of all 17 convicted officers, including Sterling and Briggs, were entirely revoked and seized to help fund the victim payouts. Men who thought they would retire comfortably on the taxpayer's dime were left with absolutely nothing. Mayor William Hughes resigned in absolute disgrace, narrowly avoiding federal indictment by turning state's witness against his own political donors. Chief David O'Connor was fired, stripped of his credentials, and vanished into obscurity, his legacy forever cemented as the architect of a monumental failure. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Samuel Caldwell walked down the heavy stone steps, pulling on a pair of dark sunglasses. Special Agent in Charge Kingsley walked beside him. $10 million, Kingsley muttered, shaking his head. The city is going to feel that for a decade. They're feeling the cure, boss, Samuel replied softly, looking out at the city streets. The disease was costing them a lot more than money. It was costing them their humanity. Kingsley nodded. Where to next, Sam? Samuel adjusted his jacket, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his stoic demeanor. I hear the Miami office needs a mechanic, someone good with engines, and even better at taking out the trash. He walked away, blending into the bustling crowd, a silent guardian who had stepped into the belly of the beast and ripped it out from the inside. The 4th Precinct was an empty, boarded-up brick shell, a monument to the day 17 badgers thought they were above the law, and the day one man proved them dead wrong. True justice rarely arrives with a warning. It often comes disguised as the very prey the wicked seek to devour. The collapse of the Oakridge 4th Precinct stands as a profound testament to the ultimate price of unchecked authority and systemic arrogance. 17 officers lost their badges, their freedom, and their futures because they forgot the fundamental truth of their oath. Power is a privilege granted by the people, not a weapon to be wielded against them. The staggering $10 million financial ruin that struck the city wasn't just a penalty. It was a mandatory restitution, a painful but necessary extraction of the rot that had infected the local government. Samuel Caldwell's silent endurance exposed the darkest corners of a broken system, proving that no badge is an impenetrable shield, and eventually, the crushing weight of real-life karma will always collect its debts.